And we're live. Wagwan, YouTube, and Facebook. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, today's musical musing is about originality in music, in composing and producing. Is it possible to be truly original? Do you need to be truly original in order to forge a career in music? And if originality and uniqueness is something that you pursue, how do you go about achieving it? So, as ever, if you've got any thoughts on this, then please do let me know in the chat or the comments. And if you would like to jump on screen and chat with me live, like a Zoom, then I will be sharing a link in the chat shortly. Before I do, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Dedicated to kind of helping music makers monetize their music through production music and winning TV, film, and ad syncs. If that's something that you think is interesting, if you're interested in writing, producing, mixing, and also kind of business elements associated with making music, and maybe even some like mental health issues, then feel free to hit the subscribe button and ring my bell so that next time I post, you're the first to find out. Cool. Okay, so let's dive into this subject. I wrote a musical musing blog post a couple of years ago about daring to be irreverent. I was introduced to the term irreverence, which can be defined as not showing the expected respect for official, important, or holy things. I went to a talk, debate, if you will, with where John Hegarty, who's head of BBH, which is one of the sort of world's leading ad agencies, talked about irreverence and that they try to always bring irreverence to any project that they're working on. And obviously, being a sort of like a multi-million pound agency, they kind of do that pretty successfully. And that was the first time I was kind of introduced to this concept. So I started thinking about applying it to music. And Christian Henson, if you're not familiar with him, he did a post recently where he talked about just that. And his one piece of advice to anyone in music is to try and be unique and original. But then that kind of got me to thinking about the question, like, is it a prerequisite for success? Do you need to do it? And I think possibly the answer is no, it's not a prerequisite to success. I know a lot of people who've kind of made a living sort of doing kind of slightly more painting by numbers approach. I also know some people who've sort of done that and ended up kind of falling out of love with music as well. But I think for me personally, I kind of feel that it's a prerequisite for creative stimulation. Because if you're risk averse, by its very nature, being risk averse can actually stifle creativity. And ultimately, when you're making music from a purist perspective, it's all about, it's like throwing paint on a canvas and seeing what happens and getting creative. And that creative stimulation, if it's not there, obviously I think your interest can wane, or it becomes boring, or you fall out of love with this sort of the idea of making music. So that's kind of my take on it. It's like, I think certainly if you're starting out in music, trying to pigeonhole yourself into the mass market of doing stuff like everyone else is probably going to make life very difficult for you, because ultimately if you're not trying to stand out from the crowd, it's like, well, how will people see you? Think of it from the point of view of a music production company. So I run a writer's circle for a production music company in the US, and we're constantly talking about trying to do things differently. And when I receive submissions, which are sort of like, they're okay, but the ones that stand out are those that are kind of like a bit unique and are sort of maybe pushing the boundaries. So I think from a point of view of kind of getting into the industry, actually being unique and trying to do things a bit differently is certainly a way to make yourself stand out and hopefully get ahead in the industry. Obviously, if you're established, there's maybe not quite so much pressure. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts. I don't purport to have all the answers to this. This is kind of more kind of like musical musing. So if you want to get involved in the conversation, let me know. I've got a few comments here. Ollie Barton says, looking forward to hearing my thoughts. Well, I'm asking the question, mate, so I'm interested in your thoughts as well. Callum McIntyre is asking, what is the line between originality and being heavily influenced by others and letting those influences dictate your own style? Well, I think that's kind of that's you've hit the nail on the head, Callum, because obviously I think this is the question. There are some people out there who say it's impossible to be truly original, because obviously, musically speaking, there's only so many notes, there's only so many combinations of those notes, and everything has kind of been, every combination has sort of been done before. But at the same time, I think the way that you implement those notes with different sort of like rhythms and like rhythmical elements, and then take into that kind of sound design and creative effects and mix techniques, I think then you're starting to dig into lots of different areas where you can start to sort of forge a uniqueness. But yeah, it's obviously you're always going to be influenced by what you know, without a doubt, and I think that's something that you can't shake off. But there was a really good quote by Dead Mouse 5, or Dead Mouse as I believe is known. In fact, I've got it up here on a banner. He says that every producer copies, good producers copy in new ways, which I'll come on to in a minute. But I think that's kind of interesting, because it sort of speaks to kind of that idea that we are a product of our influences, and a lot of things have come before us. But I think trying to find that level of originality is what stimulates us creatively, and then hopefully therefore leads to a sort of greater body of work. Now, I think one big question is, and this was something that was happening in the thread of Christian Henson's post, was, do clients want original music? Now, as I say, with the writer circle that I work with, we are constantly sort of saying, okay, what can we do? It's predominantly trailer music, and we're saying, what can we do that's a bit different? How can we sort of try and blaze a new trail rather than just pouring more of the sort of same stuff into the market? And that's where the challenge lies. But I think also the challenge is, if you were to ask any sort of supervisor or publisher or director or whatever, it's like, do you want music which is like really cutting edge and pushing the boundaries? Intellectually, they would always say yes, but ultimately, psychologically, people like what they know. And I think the danger is, by doing something completely radical, is that people will feel uncomfortable with it. But I also think as well, like, you look at Hollywood, it's like the studios are the people that put up the big money for music. Ultimately, when they're putting up big money for stuff, they're kind of very risk averse, and as such, they don't want to be pushing the boundaries. There was an article in the newspaper like some time back about, have we reached peak Zimmer? Alluding to the fact that all Hollywood scores sound pretty much the same. It's just like a homogenous mass of epic drums and things. And I think it's unfair to blame that on Hans Zimmer. Hans Zimmer sort of maybe was the pioneer and set the precedent, but I think it's the risk aversion in studios and people's lack of creativity that has sort of led to everything kind of being the same. Who knows? That's kind of my take on it. Robert Swift is saying, if we were to describe the industry as a box, should we be thinking inside or outside, and how far outside? Well, that's the question, Robert Swift, isn't it? I think climbing out of the box whilst having your head still inside the box, but just checking outside the box every now and again, but not being afraid to climb back into the box if you need to take shelter from what's happening outside the box. Yeah, both. I don't know. Brad Couture, LMO. I think a lot of originality can be found in new timbres, textures these days, as opposed to notes, chord progressions. Yeah, totally, mate. I think that's the thing. It's very difficult if you're restricting yourself harmonically to be completely original. But with all the tools that we have at our disposal, including technology and things like that, I think that's when it starts to sort of get interesting, and we're sort of looking at trying to sort of create something different. So to that end, so let's assume that we do want to be creatively stimulated. Let's assume that we do want to kind of blaze a trail and try and do something different. It's easier said than done. I'm not even convinced. I'm pretty much convinced that I don't think I'm doing anything massively original. I think everybody brings their own unique style to the table, but it's still a learning curve, and I'm still conscious of it and trying to sort of consciously bring it to my work. And I think hopefully by doing that over time, I might forge a sound, a sort of like a creative path. I don't think I'm doing it at the moment. So I think, it's easier said than done. But so that got me thinking about, okay, so if you are going to try and blaze a trail and become sort of distinctly original and unique, how do you go about it? And that's something that you touched on there, Brad, because I think this is something as well that Mark Allen texted about or emailed me about, was do I think that people are holding themselves back if they're not creating with their own sound palette? And I think that's a really important thing. I think creating your own palette of sounds is one way to try and be unique and original. Now, obviously, we're all using a lot of the same plugins and VSTs, which means that a lot of the stuff sounds the same. But if you can start to create your own palette of sounds and sample unique, weird instruments, or even just like using sound design of sounds around the studio, of a rustling of a crisp packet and stuff like that, by starting to create your own palette and your unique palette, I think that is one really good way to start kind of setting yourself apart, because you're not just relying on the presets that everyone else is using. But to that end, if you are using presets, don't be afraid to them up, because obviously there's loads of different effects and things you can do to presets or existing sample libraries to sort of change them up and make them different and make them your own. So yeah, get creative with that and do that. If you're going to copy, do it differently. That was the sort of like the Deadmau 5 quote, because some people say whatever you do, don't copy, and I think don't copy. There's no point in copying. But he's alluding to what Callum was talking about, which is that every producer does copy. Good producers copy in new ways. That we're not, no one's immune to their influences. So it's going to be there. One other thing as well, I think, is a collaboration. I think certainly I have been guilty in the past of, as a composer, just trying to do everything myself, whereas actually collaborating with incredible musicians is an amazing way to sort of broaden your horizons, certainly in terms of what's possible with certain instruments, but also drawing on what they know and what they've done. And I think doing that has been a game changer for me. Is like, I can't program a cello as well as a veteran of sort of 20 years can play it, but they also know things about their instrument and ways to use it and have their own musical influences that they can bring to a project. So certainly collaborating with amazing musicians is definitely part of it. Callum McIntyre, who got involved with the conversation, I've learned a lot from working with him, an incredible vocalist and singer-songwriter. Todd Baker, who has got a comment here which I'll share with you in a minute. Again, I've worked with Todd and he has brought kind of a lot to my work and my music. Just by virtue of the fact that a virtuoso guitarist. Cool. So I'm just going to hit the last point. So like, create your own sound palettes. If you're going to copy, do it differently, but don't copy, but just embrace your influences. I'm not saying copy. Collaborate with amazing musicians, and I think the final one is don't be afraid to embrace what has shaped you over time. Like, so for example, if you're a guitarist, sort of draw on that, use your guitar. If you've grown up listening to funk music, use that. So like major musical influences for me have been like Rage Against the Machine and Jamiroquai and like 70s blaxploitation funk. So if I can try and bring elements of that, all the sort of things that have shaped me over my kind of musical lifetime into my music, then hopefully that starts to kind of get interesting. Again, whether or not I'm doing that, I don't really know. Ollie Barton's getting involved. Right, okay, I'm just going to post this in the chat. If you want to jump on screen with me and actually have a conversation, like on a Zoom conversation, then hit the link I've just posted in the chat. You'll enter the green room and then I can let you in. Ollie Barton's saying originality for me comes from failing at what I'm actually trying to achieve in specific elements. It's always something I stumble upon by accident. Totally, man. I think that's why don't be afraid to fail, because you have those happy accidents where a little bit of magic happens, and that's where you kind of stumble on ideas which you might not have been able to sort of imagine, but by just being creative, that sort of magic happens. Flares music, handcrafted sounds will always inherently push a new creative originality instead of thinking on how to be original. Absolutely, mate. It's again, it's like creative stimulation and sort of like making your own sounds and getting creative and finding that will, by very virtue of it, get you sounding original, or certainly feeling original. Todd Baker, summary: influences or inspiration is like a kind of currency that we receive, and we want to pass some of that back into the world to inspire others. That's really nice, Todd. That's really nice. We have been lucky enough to receive it, and then we want to sort of pay it forward to other people. It's such a deep cat, man. That's really nice. Ollie Barton's following up. Having said that, I believe that experiments in the elemental stage is good, as a whole project not so good because it becomes inaccessible. Very true, very true. What else have we got here? Oh, Cy Bennett. What's Cy Bennett saying? GarageBand on the iPhone has changed the way I write. Absolutely, man. If whatever works. I think if you can sort of like have a mess around on the phone or whatever, on the train or in the toilet, writing music on the toilet. What more creative an environment could you possibly have than tinkering with GarageBand while you're having a poo? Isabella Lau. Speaking of palettes, I think originality is really found in particular combinations being used in particular context. Having a reverence of the context might be a useful route to originality. Absolutely. I think that's the thing is like, yes, there's limitations harmonically, but if you take every single element that you possibly can from the world of sonics, and the difference of those combinations is what hopefully makes something original. And the way, as Todd was talking about, that currency that you've received, if that's also included and what's shaped you, then that goes for making something original. So I noticed no one's clicked the link to jump on screen and sort of join the chat. Obviously, totally get it if you don't fancy it, but if anybody does want to jump up, then click that link and I'll let you into the green room. It's amazing in here. You won't believe it. Cool. So yeah, so if you've got any other things that you want to throw into the conversation, then by all means do sort of let me know in the chat, or if there are other issues that you are facing on a sort of like a daily basis in terms of writing music, producing music, mixing music, marketing music, running your own business, or mental health perspective, then let me know and I will do my best to sort of address those and help out and share my experiences with you, so that hopefully that might be of use to other people. So yeah, before I will go, if you are interested in production music, a lot of what I talk about on the channel, the channel is production music oriented. If you're interested in that, I've done a free webinar on it, which you will be able to access with a link in the description below. That's on YouTube, not on Facebook. So if you're on Facebook, you'll have to jump over to YouTube. Oh no, will Facebook penalize me? Will their algorithm penalize me for saying that? Oh God, they're probably listening as well, aren't they? Yeah, and there's also as well, if you are interested in getting involved in production music, then again, there's a link in the description below where you can submit tracks for consideration. That's with working with ASX, which is the exclusive arm of Audio Socket in the US. Brad Couture, who popped up on screen, and Flares, both part of that action. So thanks for joining, guys. So yeah, cool. Oh God. Right, so someone has joined the chat. I'm going to add them to the stream. This is where it could all go very, very wrong. Hi, Bobby Masacado.
Hey, Jim. Great talk tonight. Great show tonight.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to have you on board. For those of you who don't know, Bob and I have a podcast called Jim Bob's Music Massacre, where we semantically scrutinize song lyrics with hilarious consequences. So letting Bob up on screen was always a bit like, oh, should I be doing this? Anyway, Bob, tell me, what are you thinking?
It's just interesting to talk to you in a more, professional capacity rather than in the podcast capacity, to see what you do at your actual job. Yeah, I mean, because it is, I find it interesting how the creativity element is actually has parallels in all of creative industries. Do you not think so? Whether it's like making music or doing other types of art, it's the same sort of questions that artists are always asking each other.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously I'm kind of talking specifically in the context of music, but without a doubt, artists, architecture, whatever, anything sort of creative, there's always that, do you try and sort of fit in with what everyone else is doing, or do you try to set yourself apart? And I think it's a personal quest. There's no right or wrong answer. But as I say, for me personally, creative stimulation comes from pushing boundaries and trying to do things a bit differently rather than just. And I just think as well, there's greater risk equals greater potential rewards. So
do you ever think that you might be trying to predict what the industry might want and then channel your creativity in that direction?
I don't think predict. I think certainly with the writers' circle that we work in, we're saying let's not try and predict it, but let's try and dictate it. So if you can start to, rather than following the crowd, sort of being the sort of the pioneers and the trailblazer, I think that's kind of where we're coming from. Obviously, we're taking certain influences and obviously listening to what's happening. So there are elements of that. So maybe there is an element of, sort of using what's out there, and that's a predictor. But I think, yeah, it's more powerful if you can actually come from the point of view of like creating something so unique that people are coming to you for it. That's what like Norman Foster, the architect, people go to him. They don't go to him for like a generic building. They want him to do something radical and crazy. And they're probably not, they probably have to have whatever he gives them, because they don't get said, oh, can you just change that or put a chimney there? So, but I think as well, this is the thing is like, sometimes I wonder whether it's all about taking something irreverent and different and wrapping it up in something familiar. Because as I say, like I've had experiences whereby I've tried to do something different. I had a program a few years ago where I did everything with a brass band, and everything was finalized and everything was perfect. And I went on holiday thinking, boom, yeah, done it. I came back and the notes were, don't like the brass. And it's like this had been signed off at every level. It was the commissioning editor who turned around and said, don't like the brass. And it was kind of like, oh my God. But it feels like, and quite often you hear loads of tales of people who sort of tried to do something a bit innovative and creative and go out there, and it's backfired because ultimately the people that control the money, they kind of want something safe or something that they know, whilst intellectually they go, yeah, we want something edgy and cool and creative, deep down or somewhere along the decision making process line, of which there is usually a lot of people, there's somebody who says, I don't like that. And commissioning editor is an example of someone who can literally just veto everything if they want. So if you can take something creative and irreverent and subversive and wrap it in something a bit familiar, and then slowly but surely, as they get used to it, start peeling back the layers, maybe that's it. Maybe it's stealth.
Do you think there's any sort of like strategy in separating your sort of creativity, like restraining yourself in one area when you're trying to be more commercial, and then just letting yourself go crazy, for your creativity, and then maybe not mixing the two so much?
Yeah, definitely, because I think this is so I think this goes one of two ways. Is because on the one hand you've got as an artist, you want to just create art in its purest form, and it doesn't matter whether people like it or whether there's conventional formula, whatever. However, when you're writing music for a client, it's slightly different. You've got a different hat on, because ultimately they are probably paying you for a service and they want things a certain way. So I think to compartmentalize that and approach, your own art, you do whatever you want, and obviously you want to bring some of that with you to your sort of paid commissions, but at the same time also being conscious that if somebody is paying you to deliver something, you have to sort of tap into their vision and maybe sometimes leave your ego out the door, if that makes sense.
And how do you live in that middle ground where you're just trying to create catalog music, so you've not got a brief and you've not
someone's banging on my door just live.
Oh.
4 minutes.
Come in.
Sorry.
Come in.
He can't. I've locked the door.
All right.
Always there was somebody yesterday on the live. There's like his head kept popping up over here. I need to put a sign on the door, live on air or something. Middle ground. Well, it goes back to the sort of middle ground. It's like the painting by numbers. Yes, there are people who make a career of sort of like just doing that sort of safe stuff, and I know a lot of people who've made good money from doing it, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. I've had that experience with daytime TV where it's very much about just churning out stuff, don't really care as long as it's sort of run of the mill and average, and it's like it's fine, but I found that to be creatively very unfulfilling, and so didn't want to build a career on that, because it's like I want each piece of music that I make, I want it to be better than what's come before. Whereas if you're constantly doing that way, just sort of churning stuff out, I think for me personally, it just wasn't a fulfilling space to be in. So there we go.
Wow, you've got a lot of convictions. I'm very proud of the way that you maintain your creativity.
I spent quite a lot of time thinking about it. So yeah, cool. Right, guys, I'm gonna have to go because Michael outside needs his bike, and my bike's changed to his bike, and that's why he's banging on the door, because he can't get his bike. Yeah, thank you very much for everyone for getting involved, man. There's some excellent input, and thank you, Bob, for joining me live on air. I'm gonna boot you out now, but I'll join you in the green room for a
yeah. See you later, man.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining. It's been a pleasure, and thank you everyone for getting involved in your input. I think it makes it a lot more interesting than me just talking at the screen for 20 minutes. So I'm back again with another one, and I can't remember what the subject is. I think it's beginner's guide to treating your room for mixing, because I know a lot of people have kind of got really weird rooms for mixing in. So yeah, thanks very much for watching. I'm Jim Huswit. Again, if you haven't already, please smash that subscribe button and ring my bell, so that you're first to find out about all and every post that I do. And there's quite a few of them at the moment. So thanks a lot.